The lion, king of beasts, symbol of dignity and power, aristocratic and noble. Do these eyes reflect our own predatory instincts, or is it just an echo of fear from the time when we were as much the lion's prey as his equal? The lion, top of the log of large African predators, and the cheetah, somewhere in the lower ranks. Both are invested by many with a special aura of mystery because they're killers. Ferocious, cold-blooded, ruthless. The words say more about the people using them than about the big cats themselves. Animals are driven by instinct and by the simple fact that they do what they have to do in order to survive. The emotional content of their actions is nil. The sentimentality ours, not theirs. So, let's take a look at some of the lowlights of predator life. Both lion and cheetah are found in a variety of habitats ranging from the dry savanna regions of the Kalahari to the bushveld savanna. Cheetah is a Hindu word for spotted one, but the last cheetah dropped out of sight in India in 1952. 10 years ago in South Africa, the cheetah was endangered, but through dedicated and careful management, the population here has increased, and at present they're out of danger. Cheetah hunt by sight, so they're generally active during the day. But they're shy animals, and unless they're actually on the hunt, are seldom seen by visitors to the national parks. Of course, they're not that plentiful. 300 in the whole of Kruger Park is equivalent to having just 2 cheetah in an area the size of Johannesburg and all its suburbs. Unless they're using a high spot as a lookout, cheetah blend completely into the background, and when they're lying down, making like a cheetah skin rug, they're even less visible. They're the most timid of the large African cats, perhaps from being bullied by more rough-necked predators, and they tend to be always on the alert and nervous. By contrast, lions are more typically cats, very relaxed and drowsy-looking. It's been suggested that lions were originally northern hemisphere animals and used to a much colder climate than that of Africa, and what we interpret as self-assurance is simply heat exhaustion. But Panthera leo, the lion, is well fixed in the fossil record of southern Africa, and a couple of million years should be enough time to get your thermostat set. Lions are cryptically colored, which is the scientist's way of saying their coloring resembles that of the background. The male's mane is thought to be body armor to give him protection in fights with other males. But by and large, the king of beasts fears no one, and this is perhaps where his nonchalant aloofness comes from. Massive paws make for quiet and easy movement, and for walking up to 25 kilometers a night. But a single blow from one of these can topple a buffalo. Except for the cheetah, all the cat family carry stilettos in their paws, claws that are retracted into sheaths and flicked out only when they need to get a firm grip on live prey at the time of the kill. The whisker pattern on the face is the lion version of a human fingerprint. Every one is different, and if you're daft enough to get this close to a lion for long enough, it's possible to work out who he is. Lions have good sight and hearing, but generally in the animal world, a long muzzle is a sign that the sense of smell is also well developed. Could this one be sniffing out the latest news? Compare it to the cheetah, which is more geared to pinpointing its prey by sight. Eyes set high in the skull allow it to watch over the top of the grass, while its body stays hidden, a living submarine, periscope up, hunting for a target. Instead of the cryptic coloring of the lion, the cheetah has gone for camouflage. Spots hide it well in dappled shade. Young cheetah, like lion, have retractable claws, which is how they can still climb trees. But in the adults, the claws become permanently fixed like the claws of a dog. Cheetah are the only cats where this happens, and it's probably how the myth originated that cheetahs are part of the dog family. But it's well and truly part of the family of Felidae, the name science has given to cats. Long legs, high withers, small head. The cheetah looks gangly, but it has big nasal passages and huge lungs, the twin carbs of the animal world. When it hits the throttle, the oxygen pours in and it can go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in times that a Grand Prix driver would envy. The fastest moving mammal on Earth. By comparison, the lion's short but powerful legs are much more weapons than running equipment. There are probably as many theories on how lions kill their prey as there are lion watchers. But as with most things in the rough and tumble of the real world, when the chips are down, the theories go out the window. And the only technique is to wrestle your prey to the ground in the best way you can. This is the time when the daggers are drawn. We tend to think of the lion as king of the beasts, as somehow invincible. But if you're a street brawler, black eyes, broken noses, and thick ears are par for the course. Just in the basic business of survival, lions sometimes take a beating from their own kind or from their prey. Nature demands a heavy penalty for mistakes. Lions seldom move their victims after a kill. They feed on sight. A hungry lion will eat more than a quarter of its own body weight at one meal. And if that means nothing to you, it's like you or me putting away 40 or so man-sized T-bone steaks at a single sitting. Lionesses do most of the killing. But if food is scarce, the lion, supreme male chauvinist that he is, will use his dominance to keep the females off the carcass till he's had his fill. But lionesses sometimes do the same with their own cubs. So there's not much noble about them either, and fewer than half the lion cubs born survive to adulthood. Lions can take time over a meal because they are willing to do physical violence to anything that threatens to interfere with them. But cheetah, as solitary animals, are fairly defenseless. They're often robbed of their prey by leopard or hyena, so they drag their food out of sight and keep their eyes peeled for possible trouble. The young of all the big cats have to be taught to hunt, and without parental guidance, they're unlikely to survive in the wild. These cubs playing on the carcass of a springbok are actually at school, learning by doing what they need to know. Cheetah cubs are often left on their own while mother goes hunting, and it could be that a baby cheetah's long hair is a camouflage, a disguise to make the cub look like the honey badger, a ferocious little fighter that is given a wide berth by almost all other animals. Nevertheless, about half the cubs die within their first few months. Eagles, hyenas, cat flu, rickets all take their toll. Scientists tell us that the play between a mother and her cubs helps to strengthen the bond between them and is nature's way of compelling her to return to them after the hunt. But for us ordinary mortals, it would be nice to think that even in the hard and practical world of nature, there's also a measure of love and joy. When Rudyard Kipling's Wildcat said, "I am the cat and I walk alone," he basically had it right. Most cats are loners, but the lion is an exception. Lions are the only cats that have a social structure based on the pride. Most often, a pride consists of a breeding male and a number of females, and their cubs of various ages, all of which are treated as part of the family. Cubs are usually tended on a communal basis by all the lionesses in the group, and some experts even talk about pride mothers, babysitters who don't hunt but spend their time keeping the children amused. Within the pride, the dominant lion is king, and like any good patriarch, he's ready to sort the youngsters out if they get too big for their boots, especially when it's a young male flexing his muscles. By comparison, cheetah society is quite a swinging affair. Males generally go round in bachelor groups and only associate with the females at breeding time. A cheetah female will mate with any number of different males, but after that, the males walk out and leave her on her own to bring up the offspring, the original single-parent family. As solitary animals, cheetah have to look after themselves, and there's none of the social grooming that occurs among lions. The big predators fulfill an important role in the ecosystems of Africa, providing food for many others. When the lions feed, the scroungers and catchers wait in the wings, vultures, hyena, jackals, and a whole scad of other smaller predators and scavengers. The spectre of violent death on the African veldt, nature red in tooth and claw, was the way Tennyson put it, perhaps explains our fearful fascination with the lion and cheetah. Lithe movements, latent speed and power, indifference to everything but the matter in hand. These are the qualities that nature has given to the big cats to help them to survive. But if we take the trouble to look, all animals, the shy and the timid, the browsers and the grazers, are just as finely tuned for survival. Nature doesn't put the big cats on a special pedestal just because they're killers, and neither should we.
When most people look at zebras, their imagination stops at the stripes. But zebras, which have been around in Africa for a good 15 million years, are very specifically adapted to their environments, and stripes just happen to be the most obvious expression of that. So let's take a look at the two zebras we have in South Africa to see how they've been changed by their different habitats. The Cape mountain zebra in the mountains of the Southern Cape, and the Burchell zebra in the low veldt. Burchell zebra live in a habitat that's a mosaic of food and shelter from the elements, shade, cover from the wind, even protection from being seen by others. In an environment with a lot of predators, that can be an advantage. But for communication with your own kind, it can also present problems. Perhaps that's what the Burchell's Trojan mane is all about. A way to make himself a little more obvious to other zebras. The Lowveld also has a fairly mild climate, with not a great difference between the daytime and nighttime temperatures. Compare this with the dry semi-desert mountains of the Cape, where the mountain zebra lives. Here it can get as hot as in the Lowveld during the day, but it's much colder at night. Protection from the elements would be an advantage, but cover is rare. There are gullies that offer some shelter from the wind, but as far as the vegetation is concerned, it's seldom more than chest height, and not much use for either protection or camouflage. With so little cover, you can be seen almost anywhere, so there's no need for elaborate signaling systems like the Burchell's mane. Food is less plentiful and a lot less palatable than in the Lowveld, but then the competition and the predation is also less. So what are the zebra's stripes all about? We know that a zebra's stripe pattern is as individual as a human fingerprint, and it's quite likely that zebras could use the differences as we do, as one way of identifying each other. But what other function could stripes have? In the case of the Burchells, living in an environment where there are many predators, camouflage is probably one of the most important. But not perhaps in the sense that the stripes make the animal disappear into the background. Rather, because they make it difficult for a predator to pick out and lock onto an individual so long as that individual is part of a bunch. So the Burchell stripes seem designed perhaps to camouflage and protect the zebras by confusing the predators. The mountain zebra, on the other hand, is not in a high predator environment, but he does have to put up with very cold nights. So instead of the Burchell's striped t-shirt, the mountain zebra has ended up wearing a striped jersey. And it's quite possible that his stripes have something to do with temperature control. In the chilly mornings, mountain zebra tend to get broadside onto the sun, probably using their general blackness to help them absorb heat and warm up. But for the heat of the day, when a jersey is probably uncomfortable, the mountain zebra has developed a cooling device, a dewlap, which is basically like a car's radiator, a large interface between the air and the animal's body, where the cooling fluid, in this case the bloodstream, can circulate. The mountain zebra is basically very restrained in its actions. It has to be, because this is four-wheel drive country and a tough environment in terms of both climate and food. The mountain zebra is designed for hill work, and it's a lot more stocky in the neck and in the legs and shorter in the body than the Burchells. And not only is he put together like that, that's the way he behaves. No striding out or any elaborate gaits. Everything is in low gear, because there's no energy to waste in this environment. By comparison, Burchells seem almost frenetic. Living in a fairly mild environment with plenty of food, they've got energy to burn. Nobody really knows what this nodding behavior is all about. Some scientists say it's an intention movement. In other words, the zebras are just saying, come on, let's walk, let's walk. And then again, it could be a way to try to dislodge parasites. But when one starts, they all take it up. So it seems to be a definite intention movement. A disadvantage of living in the lush, low-felt environment is the parasites and biting flies. One way to solve the problem of reaching the difficult spots is to get together to scratch one another's backs. Nature uses this togetherness to bolster social ties and to create close-knit family units among zebras. There are also interesting differences in the way the two zebras dust themselves. Scientists are unable to explain why it should be that the Burchells rolls over completely, while the mountain zebra rolls first on one side, then turns over and rolls on the other. Maybe it's something as simple as the fact that the mountain zebra has fewer places where it can roll in its environment without getting sharp stones in its back. But it's nice to know, in this age of standardization, that there are still individuals around with minds of their own, exceptions to the rule, to send the scientists back home with something more to think about. Of course, mountain zebra also have to groom, but because of the colder climate, they're not exposed to the same spectrum of parasites as in the low veld, and in keeping with the rest of their behavior, their grooming is at much lower intensity than that of the burchels. In this highland environment, there's not a lot in the way of food, and most of it's not very palatable either. This has led to another of the differences between the two zebras. The mountain zebra's head is a lot coarser, much bigger relative to its body size than the burchel's. It's really to do with having to eat fairly rough food. He just has to have a bigger jaw, more room for muscling on his head, a bigger food processing machine to chomp and gnash his way through a whole range of tough vegetation. The burchel's, on the other hand, in its rich low-veld habitat, is able to take a fairly relaxed attitude towards feeding. All horses use their prehensile mobile lips rather than their tongues to select and sort out the food they want. Of course, they're not the only animals that have an elaborate top lip. The elephant's lip extends right out to form a trunk. Burchell zebras share their habitat with a dozen other kinds of large animals, and they've learned to live together by each using what the other doesn't. They also tend to react to one another's alarm signals, which is a kind of insurance, a way of spreading the risk, of increasing the number of eyes and ears on the lookout for trouble. But the survival strategy of sticking together in herds does have some disadvantages for the youngsters. By having to hang around mother most of the time, a lot of the vegetation they would like to feed on themselves is being taken by other members of their own family. So to make sure they're not deprived, they have an extended supplementary feeding program. This also means they can spend a lot of their time lying down, rather than having to forage for food. The foals of domestic horses do the same. It's actually more than just resting. They need to expose their flanks to the sun to get vitamins, to synthesize vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Being social animals, zebras have a pecking order in their herds, and burchels, in their high-density, high-energy environment, often fight for a place in the hierarchy. By contrast, about the most active you'll ever see a mountain zebra is in a fight for a place at the water. In their low-density, low-energy habitat in the Cape Mountains, even their response to a possible predator is subdued. And this sort of phased withdrawal, making absolutely sure that a predator is interested in you before you take off, is their more typical behavior. So the next time you look at a zebra, try to think beyond the stripes. Don't let them be the limiting factor. What you're looking at are African horses that for over 15 million years have been finely tuning themselves to survival in their own particular habitats. The mountain zebra in the sparse and arid highlands of the southern Cape, and the Burchell zebra in the lush and crowded environment of the low-veld savanna. The country cousin and the city slicker. Next to man himself, apes are the most intelligent land mammals, and because they have so many features similar to our own, people read all sorts of human emotions into their actions. So far as most of us are concerned, monkeys and baboons are good for a laugh, but to them, far from being funny, most of what they're about is simply to do with survival. Even their play is a rehearsal for things that will be important later: speed, agility, balance, ability to fight, and so forth. So let's have a look at the serious side of monkey business. Vervet monkeys and chacma baboons share more or less the same habitat. Monkeys tend to keep more to the trees because, being small, they need a refuge to retreat to when danger threatens. Baboons, on the other hand, by sheer numbers and because of their willingness to stand and fight in the face of a threat, are reasonably happy on the ground. Both monkeys and baboons share their habitat with all sorts of other life, so they have to be fairly ingenious at making a living, using their intellect to find and make use of many different sources of food. The eyes of both species are a striking feature, close together, looking in the same direction. Binocular vision, designed to give good distance judgment at short range, essential for when they have to leap around in the branches high above the ground. But the eyes are too close together for long-range work, so when they want to look at something far off, they have to move their eye base from side to side to get perspective. And if you're a small guy, it's restricting to be down on the ground rather than up in a tree. Not much difference between the hands and the feet. Vervets are the treetop version of a four-wheel drive vehicle, and they use both their driving systems almost equally. The fingernails and toenails are the monkey version of a lumberjack's spiked boots, something to get a good grip on the branches with. Monkeys have tremendous power-to-weight ratio. If we scaled them up to human terms, they'd be world record jumpers. But to them, the gymnastics are nothing special, just a standard part of their daily behavior. Life in the tops of trees is much like living on a series of islands separated by space. And for all the tightrope walking they have to do there, the long tail is an important piece of balancing equipment. But monkeys also move quite well on the ground, though the long tail here is really a bit of a hassle, like dragging a scarf along behind you for ticks and all sorts of other things to attach themselves to. There's no great difference in size between male and female monkeys, Theirs is not a society dominated by force. But baboons are a different thing altogether. The male chacma baboon is the powerhouse among African monkeys. This is a society ruled by threat. An indication of that is the baboon's teeth, which are far more elaborate than is needed for the kind of food he eats. They're actually weapons, slashing knives that can be used to inflict injury on any opponent. The male baboon's swaggering walk clearly means as much in baboon terms as it does among humans. It's aimed at browbeating the competition to keep out of his way. And if the advertising works and the rival is bluffed, it saves having to fight. In the Transvaal Lowveld, monkeys and baboons live in more or less the same areas and make their living in more or less the same way. So how do the monkeys survive? Well, quite literally, by living dangerously, by going to the outer limits, to the edge of the tree, the tip of the branch, to the places where baboons, even the little ones, can't possibly compete with them. For those times when a monkey has to put itself at risk to feed, and might be vulnerable to birds of prey, for example, or even leopards, nature has given it a set of pockets in the form of cheek pouches where it can store food. Sitting down to the job, so it can use both hands, speeds up the operation. Collect a lot of food quickly, store it in the pouches, and get back to a safe spot where you can sort out what you want in your own good time. Sometimes the way monkeys feed seems to be very wasteful, but it's really nature's way of providing a meal for whoever happens to be downstairs. Of course, small baboons can also get up into the trees, but there comes a time when growing size and weight make it all just a touch hairy. The big baboons have learned that the youngsters foraging aloft drop or knock a lot of useful food onto the ground, so they hang around to make the most of it. Baboons basically make their living by capitalizing on every opportunity that comes their way, constantly exploring for new sources of food and ways to gather it. This is how they've been able to adapt themselves to such a wide range of habitats in southern Africa. Day by day, they explore, taste, and experiment with new things, and they're quick to learn the tricks of the trade from one another. Here they've discovered food in a temporary pond, and what is interesting is that they're finding it by feel rather than by sight. Once again, being one of the smaller, lighter members of the troop gives you that slight extra reach over the adult. And, like the monkeys, cheek pouches are a handy pocket for hiding your spoils. Unfortunately, in national parks and nature reserves, both monkeys and baboons have discovered there's sometimes also a source of food in vehicles. The problem is not so much that the source is unreliable, but having learned from a single experience, they'll stay, quite unnaturally, at the same spot by the side of the road day after day, instead of being on the move over new ground all the time. As a result, they suffer a much higher concentration of internal parasites and disease than they normally would. So feeding them is a selfish rather than a kind-hearted act. Scratching is the classic monkey symbol. Grooming is a very positive adaptation to survival in the African bush, a way of getting rid of burrs and thorns and parasites, and of keeping your coat in good condition. And getting help from others strengthens social ties. It's well established that close bonds exist between animals that groom one another like this. And the groomer does get something for his trouble, in the way of grubs and grass seeds and so on. Among baboons, certainly, grooming is also a way of paying homage to the big guy, of flattering the boss, of getting near to him to enjoy his protection. You can also practice on the rest of your family, or start at an early age on Mom's tail. Part of the deal that goes hand in hand with having a large brain is slow physical development, and that requires a reasonably sheltered childhood for both monkeys and baboons. The babies are carried, pampered and nursed for a long time, so food gathering for them is not too serious, and they can afford the luxury of being able to fool around a bit. This is the time for play fighting, for sparring, and preparing for what, in later life, could be serious fights to establish a place in the hierarchy of the troop. At this early stage, it's all a bit uncoordinated. They can still make mistakes and get away with it, but later on, that slip could cost him his life. But Mom is never far away, so it's all still good for a laugh. But very soon, the fun will disappear out of it, and it'll become the serious business of just staying alive. The serious side of monkey business. During the dry season, the weather over the eastern Transvaal lowveld is clear and calm, and the mornings are a good time for flying. Every day when conditions are fine and the light is good, a team of Parks Board scientists fly out on the annual plant and animal population census of the Kruger National Park. A morning's work will cover, more or less, a single block of the Kruger Park. And it takes 4 months to survey the entire 2 million hectares of this, South Africa's biggest wildlife reserve. It's tedious, time-consuming and expensive, but it's a vital part of the Parks Board's management strategy. Big as it is, drive east or west through the Kruger National Park for a couple of hours and you'll come to a fence, a barricade between the park and the outside world that bottles the larger mammals inside as effectively as if they were trapped on an island. The fence is a barrier that stops the animals from reacting naturally to adverse conditions inside the park by simply moving off. An obstacle across their migration routes that forces them out of balance with other animal populations and with their environment. A man-made problem demanding a man-made solution from the Parks Board's wildlife managers. Finding an answer involves keeping a finger on the pulse of what is happening in the park from year to year. The state of the vegetation, the distribution of large mammals, their population makeup and numbers. Easier said than done, even with animals as big as giraffes. From ground level, it's difficult to get an overall picture, and in the bushveld environment, repeatability of the count from year to year with any degree of accuracy is practically impossible. So, about 2 decades ago, the scientists took to the sky, and the annual aerial census is now a cornerstone of the Kruger Park's management philosophy. Flying at a height of 65 meters, engine throttled back, they traverse back and forth in parallel lines across the blocks. On this sortie, the team is led by Kruger's chief scientist, Solomon Hubert, with botanist Willem Gertenbach sitting in as navigator-recorder. The object is to spot every animal in a 400-meter wide strip on either side of the aircraft and record it in a shorthand code at the right point on the map. Obviously, some animals are missed. They freeze, they're under trees, or light conditions deteriorate. But over the years, the error has turned out to be consistent enough for the count to be taken as accurate. The state of the vegetation and the presence of surface water is also recorded. A herd of earlonk needs more than a single flypast to count all the animals, but they're always worth a second look anyway, and it's a chance for the observers to give their concentration a break before they turn back on track again. To simplify management in a park that's the size of Wales or the American state of Massachusetts, Kruger has been cut into blocks using natural boundaries such as rivers and changing vegetation types, as well as access roads and fire breaks. All useful landmarks to keep the team on track over the hundreds of thousands of hectares of featureless bush. Every few hours, there's a touchdown at the nearest bush strip to refuel. If you're used to being out and about, like Regional Ranger Flip Nell, being cramped up for 2 or 3 hours is sweet torture. And at over 2 meters tall, Ranger Johan Ulofse and small aircraft don't go very well together either. But the crew are chosen for their sharp spotting ability, not their size. André Potgieter is the park's chief technician in charge of the burning program, and Albert Viljoen is a botanist. As soon as the plane is refueled, they're off again to try to finish the block before the heat of the day brings the thermals that make low flying hazardous and uncomfortable. Later, back at the camp, the day's observations are put into a portable computer. The precise location of each sighting is pinpointed, and the species and number of animals seen is recorded simultaneously. This helps the programmers to keep up with the hundreds of sightings being made every day over the 4-month survey. Eventually, all the data goes into the main computer at the Kruger Park headquarters at Skikuza. And after some basic number crunching, the newest figures can be compared with previous years. The aerial census gives a general picture of what's happening in the park and shows where problems might be developing. But before any drastic measures can be considered, more detail is needed, and this is where the helicopter census comes into the picture. Elephant, buffalo, and hippopotamus are the 3 large mammals that can damage the habitat if their numbers become too great, so very specific information is needed about their populations. On this trip, the observers are Johan Kloppers, head of wildlife management, and Ian White, a research technician. Solomon Joubert, chief scientist, is recorder, and Piet Otto is the pilot. What they're looking for is not just net numbers, but the actual makeup of the herds. How many bulls and cows there are, how many old and young. In other words, the dynamics of the population. Fortunately, elephant, buffalo, and hippo all tend to concentrate along the river systems during the dry season, so they're fairly easy to find. Hippo generally have a more specific address than elephant, but they're quicker off the mark in seeking refuge if they're disturbed. With buffalo, the problem is usually sheer numbers. Then the helicopter takes on a sheepdog role, splitting the herds into smaller groups that are easily photographed. Taking a photograph means the animals are disturbed for the least possible time. It also gives the scientists the opportunity to do a really thorough analysis of the herd structure and to predict what is likely to happen to the population in the years to come. These evaluations form the basis of the chief scientist's annual report. His recommendations to the Kruger Park's management team of the steps they should take to maintain a healthy balance between the various wildlife populations on this man-made ecological island. Good wildlife management has always called for a high level of experience and intuition. Now, after 2 decades of aerial census, the wildlife managers of Kruger National Park are getting each year a progressively more and more complete picture of the diversity of wildlife in their care. Experience and intuition are still important, but now the guesswork is being reduced.